So today I'm going to be discussing my concept map for this week concept map assignment. So when thinking about forming this speech and something I would want to talk about, I would want to speak about something that I really am passionate about and truly do care about, because I feel like it's going to make it a lot easier for me to want to give a speech, to have the motivation to do the research, and it will be a lot easier for me to talk about something that I truly am interested in. So I decided I was going to focus on sports. Sports is something I love and I'm very interested in, and specifically Houston sports, because I'm a big Houston sports fan. I'm just a big believer that you should support your local team. I never really understood why people support a team all the way across the country, unless maybe they're from there. I'll get that. I think it just makes it a lot more fun supporting your local team. That way you can be friends with the fans nearby, and also if you ever want to attend the game, you could go. Shouldn't be too far away for you. So just focusing on sports is something I'm very interested in. I am a kinesiology major, and although I will be sticking to the health side of it, so looking into athletic training, I definitely think if the medical route didn't work out, the next thing I want to pursue is something working behind the scenes in sports, some type of analyst. I don't really know what all is out there. I think it would be very hard to land a job in that field, so that's why I kind of decided to stick to the health side of it. I think I'd be more guaranteed finding a job that way. But, if something ever did come up, I think that my second choice would definitely still be sticking in sports, but just in a more involved in the game instead of being more on the health side of it. So, discussing Houston sports, the first thing that I would want to talk about is the teams. Obviously, I feel like that's the biggest part of it. You can't have the sports without your teams. So the 4 professional sports teams we have in Houston, we're going to have one for basketball, football, baseball, and soccer. Basketball obviously being the Rockets, and football obviously being the Texans. I put here young talent because I think one thing that these two teams really have in common, and it's the most notable thing to say about them right now, is their young talent. Both of these two teams have a very talented young core of players, and although they might not see a championship in this year or next year, which it is a possibility, but maybe not quite, I think definitely in the next few years to come, there will be hopefully many championships coming to Houston. I think if you want to get into sports, if you've been thinking about getting into Houston sports, now is the time to do so, because I will say the next few years, especially for these two teams, will be very exciting. Both teams full of young players, very fun to watch. Looking at baseball, obviously you have the Astros. Due to their recent success, everybody knows the Astros. I feel like there's a lot of Astros fans. So also something I want to touch on, obviously, is the World Series. Just to their recent success in the World Series, their recent World Series wins, the amount of times they've been in the past few years. So definitely would take time to discuss that with them. And then finally, looking at soccer, you're going to have the Dynamo. I feel like this one is definitely the least discussed out of all of these 4 teams. I feel like soccer is just not as popular in Houston right now, but it's still a great sport, and still I want to touch on all the teams, so I would take some time to talk about them, maybe just a bit less. I've actually been to a lot of the Dynamo games in my life, probably more than any of the other games here. Well, I've never been to Astros games. I've been to Texans and Rockets, but I just even though I've been a lot, because I used to play soccer when I was younger and I was really into it, I kind of got more into watching these other sports instead. So I would definitely have to do some more research to prepare myself for talking about the Dynamo. But like I said, I want to touch on all the sports, so I would definitely want to still touch on it. So I think if I'm talking about Houston sports, obviously the next most important thing I'm going to talk about is just the overall history of it. So I think the first thing I'll have to discuss is the founding of the teams. Although I don't really know the founding about the Rockets, the Astros, or the Dynamo right off the top of my head, I do know the Texans were founded in 2002, which it's very actually considered very recent in the sports world, which still, looking at the timeline, 2002, I don't think it's necessarily considered recent. Like, that was before I was even born, but thinking about professional sports being founded in 2002 and the NFL, they're definitely considered a very young program organization. They have no Super Bowl appearances yet, no Super Bowl wins yet. But like I said, I definitely think it is coming soon. But if I'm talking about the history and founding, I feel like the Texans is going to be the one I want to talk about the most, just because of how new they are. Just them being a very young organization. Talking about history, obviously, another very important thing I'm going to talk about is the championships. So just kind of talk about the number of championships that each team has and the years they got those championship wins. Like I said, the Texans don't have any yet. I'm not sure about the Dynamo off the top of my head, but obviously the Astros have recent World Series wins. You're going to have 2017, 2022. Other times they've been in the past few years. I believe they went in 2019 and lost. So yes, obviously you're going to have a lot to talk about with the Astros recently. And in the Rockets, they have NBA championship wins in 1994 and 1995. So it's been a very good while, 30 years. But like I said, definitely think they're to come soon. But just talking about Houston sports right now, touching on our championships, I'll have to talk about the ones then. Looking into the history of it, obviously I want to take time to talk about people, just important notable people in Houston sports, which obviously off the top of my head, I'm going to think players and coaches. I'm sure there's other people that I could touch on in this, just such as owners. I'm sure there's been some very notable owners who have done a lot of things for Houston sports, and maybe people who weren't necessarily players or coaches, but just behind the scenes and helped these teams to happen. So definitely just looking into that, seeing what people I could touch on. But I think the two main things are obviously going to be the players mainly, and then also take some time to talk and touch on the notable coaches throughout Houston sports. I can't really think of any off the top of my head, but just definitely want to take the time to find out what I could talk about. And then notable players, would obviously have to look into this some more too, but just thinking off the top of my head, if you're thinking about Houston Texans football, I think someone that's always going to come to mind is J.J. Watt. That is always the first big name I would think of, and I'm sure for many other people too. So just people of that nature. Also, looking more at the Rockets, I would say like Hakeem Olajuwon, because he was present on the team during those 1994 and 95 championship wins. And then with the Astros, I feel like you would honestly just talk about a lot of the recent players, the people who have brought the most championship in the recent years. So there's a lot of people I could touch on there. Definitely have to look into some for Dynamo, but those are just some notable players I can think of off the top of my head. Also, don't want to leave him out, James Harden for the Rockets, although he never brought us a championship. He was close at times, and he definitely did a lot for that team, and I think he definitely would deserve some recognition in giving a Houston sports speech. Another thing I want to touch on is just the fan base, maybe who has the most loyal fan base, who has the most active fan base. So I would say over the most recent years, I would say most likely would be the Astros, just because of their recent success. This is just me thinking right off the top of my head, but also I feel like football is always going to have a fairly big fan base just because of how big football is in America. So definitely probably the Texans, but just kind of take some time to look at each fan base and their tradition, and then maybe just offer some advice for people looking to become fans. So taking time to discuss things such as ticket pricing, just maybe which websites offer the most safe and reliable deals. I think that you can find relatively good ticket pricing for any of these teams. Take the time, make sure to do some research, but the pricing, it's nothing too crazy. I think there's definitely some great deals out there. So I definitely want to offer some advice about that, and just helping to get people more involved in Houston sports. And then also we just want to take some time to talk about the stadiums, which I think could also be tied into the history, maybe talking about the history of the stadiums and the history of the name changes, which I'm going to get into, such as I put Minute Maid right here because that is the Astro Stadium, but they did just recently change their name. I believe it's something like Dakin. I can't think of it, like, I don't know. I don't have the name memorized for sure, but I feel like it's Minute Maid. Everyone knows Minute Maid. So it's definitely going to have to take some time to get used to the name changes. But like I said, when talking about stadiums, I probably would want to touch on the history as well, so that would tie into the name changes of the stadiums. So we also going to have NRG, which is the Texans Stadium, Toyota Center is the Rocket Stadium, and then Shell Energy is the Dynamo Stadium, which that one's been changed like 3 times in the recent years, because when I went there, it was BVVA, I believe, and then it was something else. So that one's been changed a lot. So just kind of talk about the history of the stadiums and just some fun facts about them, such as the capacity. I feel like this isn't as important, but definitely still something I would want to take some time to touch on, and just kind of the history of them, and mainly the location. I know they're all located relatively closely to each other, kind of in the same general area, and they're all fairly easy to get to. With the Houston traffic, it probably can be a bit crazy at times, but it's nothing too crazy. And also maybe take some time to discuss just things such as parking, which could also be tied into fan base, just to offer some advice. So I feel like a lot of things up here I could tie together, and I'd want to take more time to discuss the teams and also the history. I feel like those are the most important things I would want to focus on, 2 main points, and then tie some things together for a third point. But overall, I think the concept map was a great idea. It really helped me to organize my thoughts well. Just thinking off the top of my head, I could only have a few things come to mind, but once I started writing, I just kept thinking of more and more things. So I really did enjoy this assignment. I think that it will be very beneficial, and I think it just helps me to lay a good foundation, just kind of lay down the ideas I think of right away that I really need to touch on, and kind of help me to branch off with them a bit more. So I enjoyed this assignment. I think it's just giving me a great foundation and preparation for my speech. So thank you, and this is my concept map.